Hi, I'm Christina Dennis, and you are listening to the Recovered Life Show. Every week, we bring you a Recovered Life discussion about rewiring your brain and how understanding your brain will help you fully live your best recovered life. Remember, addiction is a life-threatening condition, and the information in this discussion is provided as a resource only and is not to be used or relied on for any diagnostic or treatment purposes. This is not a substitute when professional diagnosis or treatment is needed. Now let's jump into the discussion. So today's room is going to be talking about turning your frustrations into assets. Last week we learned about stressors and the stress cycle, and I gave 6 really good tips on how to complete the stress cycle, because it's cumulative stress that kills us, not the stressors in our life most often. But so being known that, yes, thank you, Val, for letting me know that that happens. Being known that that you have an outcome in order to deal with your stress cycle is what is so powerful, and probably one of the biggest points of this book called Burnt Out, and how to unlock the stress cycle. But the next chapter, and this is the one I'm going to share today, is talking about what do we do about the stressors. And I think when we're in recovery, we realize there are a lot that we can't control at all. Like, it is not possible for us to control things that are outside of us. If you are in a program, you hear people, places, and things is uncontrollable. If you are not, I'm sure that part of your recovery process has been that you know that you cannot control things outside. So what I'm going to propose is this three strategies to turn assets into, frustrations into assets, are about things that we can control. And because this is the brain room, I'm going to share a little bit of the science behind it. So, what is that mechanism in our brain that manages the gap between where we are and where we want to go? And it's called something very specifically the discrepancy reducing, increasing feedback loop and criterion velocity. Now, that's a long, very, very educational term, very scientific, but the book kind of starts referring it to our own internal monitor, and we all have one. And what the internal monitor does, it knows the goals that we have, it knows exactly how much effort we put into every goal, and it knows how much progress. And it manages the effort progress ratio. And our own internal monitors have a ton of opinions about what is a suitable amount of effort and what isn't. And so if we have high investment into something and little progress, every one of us is going to be frustrated. Every one of us is going to have feelings. It is impossible to get to a place where that doesn't happen within you. But there are strategies to help you deal with those frustrations. And I want to make it clear that we're only talking about stressors that you can control. And I'm going to share the 3 strategies that our monitor understands, and how we can work with our monitor and not have a negative, pessimistic view. There is a strategy called planful problem solving, and that's the official scientific name. And what this means is that we take the time to analyze the problem, we make a plan, and we execute the plan. Sometimes we have to change the kind of effort we're doing. If you are a person who carries a lot of stuff around with you, let's say Band-Aids and all kinds of things. When my son was much younger, I carried a bag of stuff. That is exactly what planful problem solving is. We make sure that we look at all the possible outcomes and we have a plan for it. And I see we have a room full of ladies, and I'd have to say that there's a huge amount of socialization toward planful problem solving toward our gender. The problem is okay, we've got a lot of skills in this area, but
every one of us knows that every problem has to have its own plan. So when we have huge amounts of complication, it takes many, many plans to do, and there is a ton of effort in this. Doesn't mean it's a bad thing, but it's really important to understand that this is a mechanism that our monitor is teaching us how. This is something we've been socialized to do. If you've ever been in a group of people and you tend to be the person that they go to, or everybody else is silent until you make the plan, that may smack of codependency. But it's important to really know that this is a solution. This is a strategy to have a plan. The second strategy is called positive reappraisal, and that is something that I think a lot of us know how to do. And it's important to kind of recognize yourself for having this skill and this strategy. And if you are naturally optimistic, then you know how to look at a problem or a frustration and see that there's something positive in it. It includes recognizing that the goal or the thing that we're going toward is worth it, reminding ourselves it's worth it. It's about reframing difficulties during the growth, and it's natural optimism. And optimism, although we're not talking about toxic positivity, optimism is directly associated with positive outcomes. And so it's a really, really worthwhile thing to start to cultivate. And I think all of us learn this when we are in recovery and we start to see that we have the ability to reframe a problem and to recognize its worth. And so that's a really positive thing to do. And when you're dealing with strategies, it's very, very helpful. Positive appraisal, reappraisal is not toxic positivity, and it's not feeling, okay? When we reappraise something, it does not mean that we don't get to feel frustrated about our plan not working in the first place or it taking a little bit longer. We still have to have these feelings. And I can see and tell you that I had a habit in my recovery of saying, that's okay because this came out of it. And it was my way of bypassing the feelings of that I had about things being more difficult than I anticipated or challenges. And so I love that they include that positive reappraisal is not just, saying, oh, we call it distorted thinking in ACA program, and it's called bright siding, where you always look at the bright side. It is not helpful to us to not feel the feelings about the challenges. It is also not denial, and nobody is asking it to be denial. And so if you have been around somebody who is in denial about things being hard, you know how frustrating that is for those of us that are on some of those teams, because we realize, okay, there isn't some reality in here. And so I think it's important to be gracious to ourselves for having the frustration and to understand that our brains are set up to look at negative things. It's called negative bias. And we literally have an 8-lane highway in our brain to tell us what danger is, and a little gravel road to the positive. And that's why rewiring your brain is so important. It's why putting effort toward things that you really make a decision and you still have choices. Yes, this is hard, what I want to do. Yes, there's been a problem that's come up. I'm learning how to plan around these problems, and I'm also realizing the goal is still worth it. And I can feel frustrated and still move toward and still have action. It is really, really good to know that when you're dealing with stressors you can control, right? You analyze the problem, you make a plan, you execute the plan, that's problem solving. When you are reappraising the positive, you acknowledge the difficulties and you see what is working. And here's what I found so interesting, and I thought it would be really helpful to share, that to the degree of uncomfortability in your actions, in your plan, in your goals, is actually creating something that is even more important. And so I think that's really helpful for me. We talked about it in the episode today for Recovered Life, where, we realized that actually having problems, actually having a struggle makes it more worthy. And I love some of the scientific, because as I said, this book is based on science. I love some of the examples that they showed where we can really see that there is a direct result. The more uncomfortable we are, the better the results. One was they had students whose assignments were typed in a very ugly font that was difficult to read, versus students that had information given to them in a very readable font. And they saw consistently the students who had assignments typed in this ugly font remembered more information in the short term and had better testing in the long run, which I think is awesome. And there was another study that showed that when you had an annoying buzzy sound in the background, it increased our actual ability to be creative. And I just love knowing that they have scientific evidence that shows the more difficult something is, it will be worth more. Another example of how struggle creates strength is physical exercise, right? We know when we put our body through pain, we have gain. In fact, we have little signs, no pain, no gain. And that is one way to look at it in the physical world. Well, the same thing is happening with our emotions and what our capacity is to deal with the uncomfortableness of going for something that is more difficult. So there's an actual downside to things being easy, and they've shown this, that novices who rate themselves as very confident produce work that is inferior versus somebody who is an expert who understands that the work is going to be hard, and therefore they will be much more less, or they'll be less confident, but actually provide a better outcome. And so I like the idea that we think about positive reappraisal and using it as a powerful tool. It not only reduces stress because we understand that the challenge that we have is going to be more difficult, and that it's to be expected. It also changes the brain function, which I love to know this because it makes me feel like I am not doing it wrong. I think that I always have a sneaky suspicion that other people know how to do everything and I don't know how to do it. And when we have difficulties and challenges, it changes our actual brain function. The dorsal lateral cortex activates, which dampens the ventral medium front cortex, which dampens the amygdala. And the amygdala is where we have our stress response. So actually, something that we have appraised correctly and understand is going to be difficult reduces our stress. And I think that's just so powerful to know. That this actual stressor, that there's some benefit that comes with it, that there's a huge upside to things being challenging. Now, not every stressor is beneficial. And knowing you're being compared to others is one of the most devastating things for our performance. And it just made me think about standardized testing in our world. That actually knowing something is difficult, but knowing that your results are going to be compared to other people's results reduces our ability to perform well. And I think that's so interesting if you're in a leadership type of position, if you're working with people. Maybe that is why that sales contest doesn't exactly work. Maybe it's not the right way to go about it. And I've always kind of sneakily suspected that when my results were being compared to somebody else's results, it wasn't an accurate measurement, and it actually did me harm. So when we have to do reappraisal, positive reappraisal, we can look at a couple of things to help us do that. We can change the expectancy, the plan. We know problems are coming. we're in the middle of it, what we thought was going to be the right way to do it isn't, or some outside stressors come in. And one of the actual tactics that you could take is changing your definition with winning. You change what you thought it would be like how difficult it was and how long it will take. You redefine winning. And she used a oh my gosh, I have no English very well today. She used like climbing a really big mountain. If you're given the information that it's easy, it will be totally easy for you to climb the mountain. Your ability to deal with the challenges as you're climbing the mountain is going to be much more diminished. And you will realize that your effort is much higher than the payoff. And if you don't have a correct appraisal, often we can quit. And I can absolutely relate to this in my life, because if I thought something was supposed to be easy and it ended up not being easy, my frustration would be off the charts. And so it's really important to know, and how important to know these tools and make sure that if we start feeling the challenges, we do some reappraisal. Once we redefine winning, we're able to have the strength to keep doing it. So if you're trying something that has been proven to be difficult, it is important to know that we have to have a non-standard relationship with winning, and we need to break it down into obtainable goals. All right, obtainable goals, and we need to acknowledge the difficulties, and we need to see where it works. And that is essential in doing what we need to do. They brought up an entire performance about how, like when we're recording something as a musician, and I love this example, we looked at the whole idea of what is perfection, what can be done, and how this conductor in the middle of sharing, taping, recording over and over again, and realizing that everybody was falling off. Their motivation, their ability to expand was shortening because of how many times we were taking it. And she gave the group of singers a different goal. And it had to do with providing joy for one particular person, which allowed them the access in order to get there. And it was just phenomenal to hear that, because I could see that in my own life. That when I say, okay, I'm going to, do this. For instance, I hear a lot of people that have expectations about getting married and having a child at that time. And they put an age on it. And those are stressors that they can't control. And so they continue to do that, asking for that to be the only goal when they really need to put it down into smaller increments. Like maybe meeting somebody looks like getting comfortable with your own anxiety and starting to create friendships first. The incremental goals that we set need to be, I'm sure everybody's heard SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, but they have a few more that I think are really cool, so that if you do have a problem, you're in reappraisal, you're not exactly sure how to break something down, use these as your guideline. They need to be soon. So in order to keep ourselves going and obtaining and overcoming these challenges, we need to have goals that can be attained soon. They need to be short, very understandable. They need to be incredibly specific to, I'm not going to make the whole world happy, I'm going to make my family happy. And these are the 3 people that I'm going to work on. They need to be certain. In other words, we have to have goals when we are looking at challenges and moving forward, that we know we can obtain. We know that we can do it within it. So I know that I can go online and fill out one piece of paperwork. So that's going to be my new success measurement. They do need to be positive. And what I mean by positive is that they actually feel good. We're not just avoiding suffering. Because really, having goals and measured goals have to be something that feels good. The actually obtaining it is the positive.
Oh, you went out, Christina.
No? Hello?
I can hear you now, yeah.
Okay. I don't know what's going on with today, the app, but so they need to be concrete, measurable, and they need to be personalized for you. So these big, huge contests in corporate world, where it's one size fits all, are probably not the best way or how we educate. And so it's really helpful to have this information. When you're in recovery, it is really helpful to understand for you, this may be more difficult than somebody else. And that's why your goals, your measurable goals, need to be specific to you. It is not the same thing as giving a reward um, versus having success. In order to measure progress, we need to have something that is successful within itself, not just a reward for showing up. No participation awards. No, it's about being part of the group. That's the success. So it's counterintuitive and a lot of rewarding will happen, but that doesn't necessarily translate into feeling like we're winning. The other thing that we can do is we can change the expectancy and redefine failing. And, they gave a bunch of really, really good examples that I'm going to share just a few for the sake of time and the technical difficulties. One is the post it note. That was a mistake, right? That was a chemist who was trying to create a very strong glue. And the fact that he created a weak glue ended up being much more useful to people. That was actually something that fulfilled a need, but he still missed his goal. The pacemaker is another one. Originally, the pacemaker, the person who invented that, was trying to be able to monitor a heartbeat. But what he found, what his failed experiment showed, was something much greater than just a measurement of heartbeat. It's something that actually was able to keep the heart. So, the last one that I'm sharing, redefining failure, is still one of the hardest ones for us to overcome. And one reason for that is that if we have something incredibly positive, we pull back and we see something that was a failure and what we had defined as far as winning is actually not a failure, we still have to finish our stress cycle around it. We still have to grieve it. We still have to feel the pain about missing the mark. And I think this is really apparent if you feel like you were looking for something, let's say that post-it chemist, he was looking for something and he created something much more useful. He still has to deal with his frustration and grief over failing the experiment. And I think that's so interesting, and it speaks to feeling our feelings and being really open and sharing that. And that can be really difficult in public because people will say, well, yeah, but look at what happened that was good. So you find people that can understand that you still have a stress cycle that needs to be completed. Some of the maladaptive uh, behaviors that we use are self-defeating confrontation, suppressing our stress, trying to avoid it. That's a really, really big one, especially for people in recovery because, we drink to avoid, we eat to avoid, we don't like those feelings. And we think that's going to help us be more successful in, don't dwell on the negative, don't do that, but it actually defeats our ability to actually put all the energy we need to in the next one. And I think that knowing that when you're avoiding something, just knowing that this is a maladaptive stressor response and isn't actually giving you what you think it's giving you is kind of important. Now, that doesn't mean that in stressful situations, we're not supposed to take some time off. As my son's caregiver, there were times where I needed to Netflix for the evening. The trauma was too big. It would have caused more harm. But eventually, we have to be willing to explain our feelings and share them with somebody. When you hear yourself saying things like, even though I was down, I kept fighting. Try to attach asking for help
with that. That's self-defeating confrontation. That's holding ourselves to a standard that is harmful. Or if you say, I didn't let it get me down, that's avoidance. And that's not truly going to help us understand and use our monitor. Our monitor is still going to get us. And so ultimately, when you find yourself in rumination or thinking about all those things, it's a time to stop and ask for help. And I just really appreciated this book and the things that it taught me to understand, like that there is an actual brain function, that having a problem, having a challenge is actually making the goal more worthy and making it easier to obtain because of what it does inside of us is something that I'm going to spend the week thinking about. And it's something that I wanted to present to everybody. And so at this time, thank you for everyone who hung in there with the bad audio. I so appreciate it. But I'd love to hear thoughts and have, a little bit of time for discussion from anybody who wants to come up and share a little bit about what your experiences has been. Are you at a place where you understand, oh, I have been doing positive reappraisal. I have been learning how to do this. I do know how to redefine and have a non-standard relationship with winning. And now I'm going to look at failing in a different way and realize that I still get to feel the disappointment and the feelings of failing, even if it ended up being something that was really great that other people saw. Amber, I'm going to send out some invites, but I wonder if you have anything to share.
Hi. Yeah, I was just kind of thinking about it. It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. It's kind of, I love that's really fascinating, and it makes sense why, like, if we don't actually grieve or deal with the frustrations that do come up, and we're kind of bypassing uh, that part of the process, that it can always come back up, or it can diminish some of the energy going forward. I've definitely experienced that in my life. That's really interesting, though. I have to think about it a little bit more.
I know, right? It is a lot of information. And I felt like a lot of it really is what recovery is about, right? I mean, it tells us in my own life, I've seen the direct result of something that I felt huge shame for, a personal challenge that I had. My alcoholism kept me moving forward, into self-destructive behaviors, and how that really actually opened me up to such a positive world dedicated to self-growth. And so most of us who are in the recovery world already have one of the biggest concrete um, successes. And when you look at the way, if you're in a 12-step program or the day counters that are now available, it is so important that it's personal to us and that it's concrete and that we do ask for help. I mean, it's just really realized, and it's super cool to have the scientific evidence to back it up. Elizabeth, thank you for coming up.
Yes, I'm here, and I love the conversation that's going on, and having a adult child, adult child with autism, and knowing how important it is to recharge myself, and doing what I do as a person in recovery and in service in recovery and service to being a relationship coach. You end up giving and giving, but always being cognizant of recharging and coming back to self and feeding my soul, and also looking at my shortcomings, and the shortcomings of feeding. I guess today I'm reflecting on my shortcomings of, I have to disclose here, and being honest. There's that bit of arrogance too. Oh, I like what I do. I feel good about I get reinforcement about what I'm doing. But hey, get back to humility here, and gratitude, because that always keeps me in a place of peace. And I have to regenerate and stay in my place of flow and calmness, because that's where I need to feed that and not get into a place of depletion, because that's where I lose where I give best. And it's just a circle that if I get into that rat wheel of go, 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 and give, 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 I can't give to anyone, let alone what I want to do for my family. So it's taking that time to live in gratitude and living humility, being humble. And even though I spend a lot of time in recovery, yesterday I spent 4 hours in recovery, but hey, that's my arrogant self thinking, oh, I spent 4 hours in recovery yesterday. Well, yeah, that's not about how much time. It's how did that make me feel? How did that, my spiritual self, you know, it's reflecting, and it's thinking, and it's living in my spiritual world. I'm really giving that a lot of thought today, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Oh, I love that. Thank you, Elizabeth. You always bring it. You always bring it. I know that you are a woman of love, and I think that we cannot be told about love and seek love enough. Like, there is such a place in our world today that we need to be reminded over and over and over again. And I know that you share the same path as I do with a kid on the spectrum. And I mean, the path that takes us is all about this. There's this poem in the special needs world that talks about you were planning to go see the tulips in Denmark, but your plane landed in Italy. And it talks about how looking at the positive, positive reappraisal of Italy, and all of that. And it's nice, it's really beautiful. But I remember sitting in a group where someone stood up and said, I am sick of this. I want Denmark. I want to be upset about Denmark. I want to, I don't care if I can get pasta in Italy. I want Denmark. And I remember, and when I was reading this text, I realized that's right. We have to finish the stress cycle. We have to have the pain that is attached to this. And, that comparison piece, I think, is really important, because it's impossible for us to not compare. It is, we've learned that through a lot of science. Saying to yourself, don't compare, is probably not going to be something that we master. We can certainly remind ourselves not to compare or try to refrain from it, but we have to eventually say, what value am I putting on that comparison? What information am I taking from comparing? To what end? Is it to continue to redefine our relationship with winning, or redefine our relationship with failing? And ultimately, it does come down to what we dedicate ourselves to. And so, thank you very much. And I understand what you're saying when you say the arrogance. I think that speaks to me too, sometimes, because I have learned that modesty isn't about, you know, downgrading myself in front of people. True humility is not, I mean, about that either. Humility is being open to continue to learn and realizing that if it's easy for us, if we continue to dial it in, we are decreasing the value of it. And so for me, I have to embrace those struggles that I have on a day to day basis because they are expanding me to greater lengths. Teresa, thank you for coming up. What would you like to share?
I just found, I'm Teresa. I've just found all the interesting things about science, it's just crazy. I mean, crazy interesting how our brain works. Um, I feel like I'm in self sabotage mode all the time when it comes to my goals. And it wasn't until I actually had to put a little money in it, but it was affordable, thank goodness. But an accountability person just checks on me 5 minutes in the morning before I start work. I have my 3 goals written out. They're my goals. And I work on them for a half an hour uh, each a day. And then there's one goal that is specifically for the weekend. And I'm actually making progress. But all the while, I mean, I was constantly putting things in its place of things that I really, really wanted to do. And then in the meantime, I feel like I call it self sabotage. It's like, and then I'd sit here and beat myself up for not getting my goals accomplished. So I'm really interested in this book that you shared just because it makes it easier for me to understand. You know, sometimes I want to put a label on everything, but other times I just want to understand why I do what I do. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. What a good example of those incremental goals that we're talking about. What you're doing is something that can happen quickly. It's short, it's specific, it's certain, right? Because we know and we pick goals that are certain, that are positive, to make us feel good, not just to avoid suffering. It's concrete and it's for you specifically. And I think that's really one of the great ways and tactics that we can use when we're feeling overwhelmed and or we're not doing something that we need to do for ourselves. I always step back whenever I am struggling with action or I'm taking a bunch of action, and maybe not finishing it. Procrastination is a version of perfectionism because we don't want to do something until we know it's perfect. So, understanding that we actually don't want to do things perfectly because that doesn't make them valuable to us, and it really doesn't it doesn't change our ability to receive. And so I always look at the ikigai, where you have 4 major circles that have to overlap in order for you to get to that place. And for me, the first thing that I have to do is believe I deserve it. For a long time, I didn't have the belief that I deserved good things. The second one that's just to the right of it is that I have the ability to receive something great. For many years, I would pray or meditate or take action, but I actually had a receiving problem. I wasn't able to receive positive things. I didn't believe that they were meant for me. And so I will actively practice receiving. The third circle in your ikigai is alignment. And I think in recovery, we get aligned with what our true purpose is. We're not trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. We start realizing that, this life that we had wasn't really meant for us. We really want to do something else. And of course, the fourth one is action. And I just love recovery because it's a space, you come here to solve a problem. You're going to stop doing something that is maladaptive. But in order to stay stopped, we have to learn how to manage challenges, how to complete the stress cycle, and we have to understand that we are not unique, right? Everybody else is struggling as much as we are. And if it's easy then it isn't really that valuable. It does mean that I can work on learning how to receive and change some of my belief systems around it. I guess I'd like to say it a little different than that. If it's difficult for me to do, then there is probably a lot of value attached to it, because I don't want to put out that everything has to be super hard. But having the realistic expectations and understanding that my brain works like everybody else's brain, and that there is science around it. It isn't just toxic positivity, it isn't ignoring our problems. It's actually being willing to feel the worries, feel the stress, and refrain our relationships with our expectation, that actually allows us to feel and live fulfilled lives. Okay, I want to check and see if anybody else would like to come up and share if you have anything that you would like to add to the conversation. Amber or Elizabeth or Teresa, you're welcome to pop in again.
I was just gonna say, I was thinking about it, and um, it. I think you're so right about it is like a lot of what our recovery is, because it's like when you're not in recovery, like you kind of have these, how you deal with things is kind of like you reframe it, or you try to see this positive outlook on it. I mean, I've done that. I've done that so much. And then when you get into recovery, they're like, okay, let's go to the deepest part of this, and I want you to feel it as deeply as you possibly can, and I want you to sit in it for a little bit. And it's like the one thing that you don't want to do. But once you've done it and once you've gone there, um, it does, it releases it, on a lot of different levels. And sometimes we have to go back there a couple times, but it's like you really are releasing it. When before I would just kind of reframe it or say something quick, or I think you said bright siding it. And and for some reason the loop would continue. So yeah, I'm just like kind of feeling into all this information. This is really, really cool stuff. It's like it's yeah, it's really, really fascinating.
Harry, it's not allowing me to bring you up. So sorry. I've hit it a couple of times. Um, Hopefully, if you have a question, you feel. Oh, it worked. Amber, did you do it? Oh, great. Hello, Harry. Do you have something you'd like to share? If you unmic in the bottom right of your phone, we can hear you then. Okay, I'm sorry, something's not working. I do need to end the room. I shared at the top of the hour that it would need to be a little shorter today. I just want to thank everybody who came up, Amber, Elizabeth, Teresa, and everybody who stayed in the room. I apologize for the technical difficulties, but I think that this was a conversation worth having. So much for me, and I think these are absolute strategies that we can use, and it's really kind of cool to have some language around it. I'm problem solving, and I'm planfully problem solving, and I am positively reappraising, and I love that. I love that it has universal language.
Keep the conversation going. Join Recovered Life, a community of like-minded people who are looking to live their best recovered lives. Membership is free, and you can apply at recoveredlife.us.